G'day, it's Jason here from In Search of Australia. In this episode, I'm at the Gosford Glyphs to ponder whether ancient Egyptians visited Australia and carved these hieroglyphs. Well, it looks like I've got a bit of a walk ahead. Wasn't planning it. Even though there's supposed to be a road to the track, there was a barrier across it, so I couldn't actually drive down here. It's about a 20-minute walk, I reckons, from parking up the top there. So this is apparently the path. These seem to be an attempt to hold the path together. But I'm wondering whether the original path just followed a natural creek. This huge Angophora, known as the grandmother tree. What's impressive is how it's grabbed this bit of sandstone, been growing around under it and lifted it out. Found them. In the Brisbane Waters National Park in Carryong, there is a rock formation that has over 300 glyphs carved into the chasm walls. Before I go into looking at these and analysing it, we have to get some context. In 1922, the pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered and opened, where many riches were found. This caused a great fascination across the world with ancient Egypt. Being the most intact tomb ever found, people were able to get a better insight into ancient Egypt and the burial practices of the times, as generally most tombs had been robbed by grave robbers. This was further increased by the supposed curse of Tutankhamun, where people associated with unearthing the tomb or receiving artifacts died unusual deaths. However, this is not about that. The first official record of these glyphs was by Alan Dash, a local surveyor who visited the area quite frequently from about 1968. However, in 1975 he noticed these glyphs and he kept returning to the area for about 5 years to see that new glyphs kept appearing. As to which glyphs were there originally and which ones kept appearing, there is no real record of that. However, he did state that they just kept appearing. Official national parks records state that a member of the public was caught, and they were caught engraving the cartouches into the rock surface, and the chisel, a Sidchrome cold chisel, was actually confiscated and is now actually on display in one of their offices. Up until the mid-1990s, national parks have seen illegal activities such as diggings of chambers and further glyphs being added. So this has continued for quite a while, and it's only lately that it seems to have died down. Professor Najib Kanawati of the Department of Egyptology at Macquarie University examined the photographs of the site and advised it's true that most of the signs are Egyptian and 2 names of kings may be recognised, but the whole thing does not make any sense at all. Simply a decorative graffiti using Egyptian signs. He goes on to say perhaps they did visit Egypt and had some records of those types of hieroglyphs. For further context in the area, in the 60s there was actually an Egyptian theme park in nearby Kincumber. So the idea of Egyptian, or ancient Egypt I should say, was on the minds of locals in that period of time. So who actually created them? So the popular interpretation of the glyphs is this. They mark the site of Lord Nefertiru, the son of Khufu, the pharaoh. Nefertiru was leading an exploratory expedition into the southern oceans with his brother Nefer-Jesub. They became wrecked when the boat was overturned, and after a storm they had to seek shelter on the shores in the Brisbane waters. Nefertiru was eventually bitten by a snake and died. His body was mummified and buried, apparently somewhere in this area, and these glyphs are the marking of that story and his tomb. Before we start, we need to look at what a hieroglyph is. So hieroglyphs are a pictorial language by ancient Egyptians that can be either phonetic, so representing sounds, logographs, which means they're visual representations of ideas, or determinatives. And determinatives give you an idea of whether it's male, female, royal, things like that. Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? Actually, I like snakes. So the first thing I'm going to do is interpret some of these glyphs just to see if they connect to the story in some way. I thought the best place to start was here. What we have here is what could be a seric or a cartouche, and that's this enclosed area that has symbols in it. So I'm going to start with the very first symbol up in the top left corner here. This reed with a base called a sedge means southern. This B means king of Lower Egypt and is already associated with Khufu. Within the border we start the phonetic interpretation, and this circle with the hatched lines doesn't really have a name yet, but it is known to be an H, but this H is actually K. The interesting thing is there's no representation of vowel sounds that natively comes from Egyptian glyphs. The next one, the quail, represents W. Then that's followed by what's considered the horned viper, which the phono is F. We then get the obvious quail again. So the letters we get is HW, FW. Now, as I mentioned, there is no real vowel sound, and things like the H get a k, and the W is the closest that they can get to U. So if you translate it, you get Khufu, which suggests that the hieroglyph is in fact authentic in the sense that it reads as Khufu. This is further supported by actual cartouches from ancient Egypt that look like that. In this cartouche, the direction of all the animals shows that you start from the right and read to the left. This is the way that hieroglyphs tell you which way to read them. There are many glyphs that support the interpretation, such as this capsized boat. However, there are a lot of hieroglyphs that may not be hieroglyphs at all. I actually think this is showing it's a bit of a practical joke. There is no glyph that's a stick man. So one of the things that really go against this being real, for me, is the random nature of placement. You look at any actual Egyptian hieroglyphics, they're definitely ordered. In ancient Egypt, the role of the scribe was considered a very noble profession, and it was part of their approach to be very consistent, precise, and balanced in the way that hieroglyphs were actually presented. This didn't matter whether it was on a monument, a wall, or even just a rock face, but the attention to detail is definitely higher than that you see at the Gosford glyphs. A serif is the older of the symbols, which was supposed to enclose the name of royalty with the Horus falcon at the top of it, and illustrated below is either the niched or gated palace in which they resided. The cartouche, however, doesn't necessarily need the heralding. It actually represented the endless loop of eternal life that was expected for kings and pharaohs and so on. So it was supposed to be this tied loop with an infinite circle. The name actually came from Napoleon's soldiers because the symbol looked very similar to their cartridges. Another issue seems to be the confusion between what was expected in a serif and a cartouche. What we see here is odd hybrids of what is expected in each of these types of symbols. So this here is a cartouche because it's got the circular area and the tied off part to the right, while also seeming to have the falcon mounted on top. While this seems to be a hybrid of a serif and a cartouche. Another major issue is the inconsistency. These are three symbols, the same symbol, that have been carved in different locations, and it is obvious that it's been done by different people. The depth in which they've been carved and also the way the shapes are created are very, very different in detail. It becomes very evident when you're looking at the east wall as opposed to the western wall, because both have very, very different depths of carvings. And as already stated, the scribes would take great care in being consistent in detail, size, proportions, and depth. Another point being made about the hieroglyphs is that lichen has been growing in them, therefore it's very old. Now, lichen does take decades to grow, not centuries. So centuries old lichen may have died back and regrown or things like that, because you do have different conditions over time. But when we look at this and compare it to a photo from the 80s, we see that one, the lichen doesn't exist, and two, that carving looks very, very fresh. In fact, the carvings from these 80s photos all look like they've been done within that year or only a few previous years. The sandstone is very raw and yellow. Now, one of the big problems here is sandstone really does wear away quickly. If these are over 2,000 years old, I don't think we'd have as clear appearance here. Apparently, up above me, there used to be some rocks there protecting some of this area, so that could have an influence. But I doubt it would have been watertight. I feel this detracts from some real Australian history here in terms of the Indigenous history of the area. You will find things like these handprints in caves in the area, not far away from the glyphs themselves, as well as if you go further up the road, you can actually see some rock carvings at the Bulgandri Aboriginal site. It's here that these quite impressive carvings have been done into the sandstone. Not so long ago though, so it's an interesting contrast to the hieroglyphs in that these are genuine but not that old. Looks like a sharpening area. Now the conditions are totally different to where the hieroglyphs are. This is very exposed rock facing up against the sky with no trees covering it, no way of covering from wind or sun, rain, etc. However, they're fairly deeply carved in, and you can see the wear and tear that's been going on over time. When we compare that to the actual glyphs, this seems to be more worn down within a few hundred years. So as I leave here, I do ponder how someone decided if it's a hoax. I'm not going to make a conclusion, I'm just going to put down my observations. But who brought in the tools to do this? I mean, it is essentially in the middle of nowhere. Unless there was houses or something in the national park at some point, I can't see why they chose that spot. But it does make a nice little mystery, and I hope you enjoyed. See you in the next episode.